Chief Executive of the Professional Jockeys Association, Paul Struthers, who joins us on the line now. Paul, good morning.
Morning, Nick.
A very important time for you. Let's talk about some of the work you've been doing so far before we get into what might happen over the next couple of weeks. A very important measure taken to safeguard financially not only jockeys but agents and valets that you put forward with the assistance of the Racing Foundation, and there was also a significant grant from the Sir Peter O'Sullivan Charitable Trust. How useful has that been, anecdotally?
I think it's been hugely positive, and it's made a really big difference to jockeys, agents and valets. You know, the sport came together to pull together this initial support package, and it was an initial one. Who knows what racing's going to look like, and who knows what the longer term needs of both the participants and race courses and others will be. But it's made a huge difference, particularly plugging the gap that was left by government and their income support scheme. So we've paid 66 income support payments now across jockeys, agents and valets, and I think we've been surprised about the lack of call on the hardship grants that we also have available. There's only been a dozen applications to that so far, and I think that's semi-reflected by the call on racing welfare's funds for the wider racing participant population as well. So it's made a huge difference. But I think jockeys are, as a general rule, hardworking, resourceful and resilient, and I think that's really been demonstrated throughout this crisis.
Let's talk about the future. What can jockeys expect as and when racing starts?
I think they can expect it to look very different indeed. And we've been involved in extensive conversations with the team at the BHA that are leading the resumption of racing, and particularly Jerry Hill, their chief medical advisor. And Jerry enjoys virtually complete confidence from us and our members, complete confidence from us and almost complete confidence from the members in the work he's doing. So his priorities are obviously safety of participants, and that's not just jockeys, that's everyone on the race day, both from just the inherent, thankfully small, but inherent risk that exists in horse racing, and in particular, the risks around COVID-19. So Jerry has been working closely with the government. He's been working closely with his peers within racing and with other sports, and he's been speaking to Public Health England. So he is in the process, they're not finalised yet, but in the process of pulling together detailed protocols for all of the participants. So for jockeys, you know, it is going to look very, very different in the changing room area, and for valets. Obviously, social distancing is hugely important. And one of the things that's really vital is that sport reflects the UK government's wider advice to the public and doesn't feel like it's a special case. We also need to risk assess all the activities to make sure they're safe. But there may be occasions where the way sport behaves, not just racing, is slightly different to how the public need to behave. But if that is the case, we need to be able to very confidently and with evidence support why it's different. So actually, what will happen is going racing will be safer than going to the supermarket because of the screening and the testing that Jerry will put in place, and because of all the measures that will be in place on the racecourse to protect everyone that's serving the fixtures. But, you know, for jockeys, saunas are going to be out of use. We know that. We know showers are going to be out of use, which will cause unpleasantness, obviously the shower element. But the reason showers will be out of use is because even a cold shower creates an aerosol, which is why saunas will be closed. There will be other elements that we don't know for sure yet. Will race courses be able to provide a nutrition offering to jockeys, or will jockeys need to bring their own provisions to the race course? We don't know. legging up on horses in the parade ring. The likelihood would be that there will be one or two individuals who are tasked with that job rather than being legged up by the trainer or the trainer's employee. So it will be very different for them, but all of the jockeys we've spoken to, and our flat jockey board members and our safety officers have been having regular meetings with the BHA team. And the view that we are hearing from them and from the members that we're talking to is, look, some of these things are going to be difficult. Not being able to shower on a hot day when you've ridden out in the morning, you've driven to the races, you've been for a run and you've ridden in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 races is unpleasant. But if that's what it takes to get us back racing, that's what it takes, and we'll make do.
What happens if a jockey tests positive for COVID-19?
If they test positive. So Jerry's finalising these protocols now. And again, it's important that whatever the advice given to the public is the same that everyone else follows. So there is some confusion at the moment. You know, if you are around someone with symptoms, for example, it's 14 days. But if you're showing symptoms, it's 7 days. So if they test positive, there is a likelihood that there will be a requirement for participants to download the NHS's contact tracing app, assuming it works and pass the tests. And it may be, and again, until these protocols are finalised over the next week or so, we don't know for sure. It's likely that they'll have to then go into quarantine. Those that have been in contact with them will have to go into some form of quarantine as well.
Given that those protocols are yet to be finalised, we surely can't say that we're in a position to resume, even if the government gives us the go-ahead.
Well, no one said we're in a position to resume the next day after the government gives the go-ahead, because there are a number of matters that need to just be finalised. I know Jerry's work is really advanced, and I know the BHA's work on the ground and the work of the Racecourse Association and the racecourses is a long way in advance. And I think when you look at that initial date that came out from wherever it came out from of next Friday, I was always slightly skeptical of that, because we're aware that the general message from trainers is once we know we've got a date where our horses are probably a week or two away from a run and getting from their level of current fitness to race fitness. But I would, look, goodness knows what the Prime Minister's going to say tonight, and I heard your conversation with Dave, and what does he need to say? Will he say anything that's specific to sport? We just don't know, and I suspect there will be more conversations behind closed doors from tomorrow with government representatives that will shed more light potentially on what's said at 7 p.m. this evening. But looking at whatever happens and looking at the calendar, I would like to think that because racing and other sports are it's not that they're a special case, and it's important that we get all of the economy going. And racing isn't just a sport, it is a massive industry, particularly for rural communities. And it's important to get the economy of those communities up and running. It's not racing being selfish and just wanting to look after itself. There's so many ancillary jobs tied to racing, but you're almost certainly not going to restart racing on a bank holiday Monday or any other sport. So you'd like to think somewhere between Tuesday the 25th and Monday the 1st of June would hopefully be realistic. But if the lockdown's extended for 3 weeks, does that rule it out? I don't think it needs to. Does racing on a racecourse actually look that much different to what's happening in the mornings anyway? Because horses have to be exercised and looked after, and actually the step up from that to racing isn't as big as you would necessarily think. And the fact is that the protocols in place on a racecourse would be of significantly higher criteria than those in place at a yard in a morning. So I think we can be hopeful of being able to resume before the end of the month or at the very start of June. And that would coincide, incidentally, with this whole concept of us being 2 weeks behind France on the whole curve. So I think there's definitely hope, but like you, what we'll expect and whether it will be shed any light this evening is we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, clearly, as Dave was saying, I mean, this document that was available to all of us, but probably shouldn't have been available to all of us, which then had dates of meetings and so forth, and included various races being run at racecourses where they weren't normally run. To your understanding, and given the likely protocols that are still being worked through by Jerry Hill in consultation with Public Health England, how many of the country's flat racecourses are in a position to be able to race, do you think?
I would be completely guessing, because there was obviously a process opened by the BHA for racecourses to say they wanted to stage races. I think in the very first instance, so you're looking at that first week, I would imagine the number of racecourses that race will be relatively small. You want to make sure that all the protocols work, the social distancing works, both from a safety perspective and from a practical perspective. But I think there is hope that you could expand the number of racecourses partaking pretty quickly, and it's a bit like, Nick, the initial restrictions on jockeys. So with £7 and £5 claiming jockeys being unable to ride, which really isn't based on any statistical analysis that shows they're a higher risk than other more senior jockeys. It's purely a population management policy at the start, so you can hopefully commence racing without huge numbers of jockeys. But it will be an open jockey booking process for those that are able to ride. But I'd imagine, and the BHA have said that certainly day one is only one meeting. Whether that's extended to 2 or 3 days, who knows at this stage. But yeah, I would imagine a very small number. And I think we're all, based on the issue that Dave discovered with the spreadsheet, that you're looking probably at Newcastle, and whether that's Lingfield or Kempton in the south, and then a Midlands track which may or may not be Wolverhampton. I'm genuinely no more well informed than anyone else on that side of things. But slowly at first, make sure everything works, and then you start to share the benefits of returning on a wider basis.
Just wanted to ask you about private healthcare, because it was a subject that was raised by Rafe Beckett last week, and there has been consultation with private healthcare operators, but clearly not every private hospital is able to cater for every eventuality in the way that an NHS hospital would be able to. Do you still anticipate some kind of private-public partnership in order for racing's medical needs to be met, and thereby not to put unnecessary strain on the National Health Service?
It is very, very, very possible for the more minor injuries and for kind of precautionary diagnostics. It was interesting because when I watched Rafe last week, and I suspect it was misunderstanding than anything else, when he said that we didn't need to stop, or we could have got going quicker because the NHS, the private sector, could cope with anything racing could throw at them. That's just not true. Because for acute trauma, someone needs resus or needs intensive care, the private sector can't deal with that. That has to be dealt with by the NHS, and it's why it was such a major factor. So, and unfortunately, we've had some kind of personal experience of the NHS in the last week, because my mother-in-law had an accident at home and fell over and fractured her knee and had to be taken via ambulance to Great Western in Swindon. And, unsurprisingly, A&E was very quiet at 10:30 on the Friday evening, and within 2-3 hours, X-ray, diagnosed, transferred to the ward, operated on Sunday, discharged Thursday, and the staff at the hospital were amazing. So I think I think there's great confidence that the NHS would be able to cope, but I know Jerry's explored that private additional facility that depending on where we are with COVID-19 and the pressure on the NHS, I think it's looking very, very positive that the NHS would be able to cope with the acute trauma cases, and backed up by private healthcare for those that those more minor minor injuries that do happen from time to time.
And Paul, just talking about the likelihood of some of the initial fixtures that take place, we all know the tracks that have been mentioned: Newcastle, Lingfield, Kempton, Chelmsford, Wolverhampton. They are all run on synthetic surfaces. Is that a coincidence, or is that being done for a reason?
I've not been given any suggestion that it's not just coincidence, but I do know. Don't have the stats to hand because I've not actually seen them. But Jerry Hill would say that actually the statistics on the all weather, and it flies kind of in the face of what the kind of assumption is. But the statistics are that the all weather tracks, when it comes to, say, jockey injuries, are actually a little bit safer than turf, and we all assume that turf is kind of, there's a bit of bounce there and a bit of slide that might not exist on artificial surfaces. But I think there's probably a bit of coincidence and planning in there. So I don't think it's just we are only returning on all-weather surfaces because they're safer. You're talking about fractions when you're looking at the statistics. So I think we'll be racing on turf tracks very quickly if it is an initial resumption on all-weather. I don't think the figures are so big in difference. They're relatively small percentage increases or decreases in terms of the risk factors there.
Paul, thank you very much, and I wish a very speedy recovery to Kate's mum.
Thank you very much, Nick. You all stay safe.
Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.